Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Shannon, and your team for doing this, and thank you to everybody for learning to pivot anew and to do church in new space, in different space. I have to admit that I never even remotely dreamed or imagined a time such as this, and I thought I had seen it all. And oh my God, I really did never. I see Jan Hamill on here. We were in seminary together many moons ago. I'm older than Jan is, but many years ago we were in seminary together, and when we were being formed and prepared for ordained ministry and leadership, this wasn't the world anybody was talking about. It wasn't even the context anyone was talking about. And it is just, there are parts of me that are profoundly hopeful and parts of me that are very cautious and careful. The hopeful side of me sees an emerging consciousness and awareness among many in our society, in the US at least in particular, but actually it's around the globe. That something is wrong, and we don't want to keep living the way something is wrong. We want to make something right. And yet there's also the cautious side of me that knows that whenever there are any steps of progress, there will be a reaction. And when change is on the horizon, there will be virulent pushback. That is just the nature of change. That is the nature of it. And so I'm just very mindful that the signs of hope are real, and the challenges are real. For those of us in America, and I won't say too much because it may come up in the questions, the reality of structural racism, institutional, systemic racism. Somebody asked me recently, what is systemic racism? What does that really mean? I said, what it really means is racism is baked into the cake of America. That's what it really means. It's in the cake. It's in the ingredients that went into the cake that made this country. And it's a country that I love, but it's in there. And so rooting that out and creating an American cake where there's equality, liberty, and justice for all, not just for some, that's going to take some real work. And we're seeing some of that. I've never seen protests like this. People advocating for change, for the good, challenging racism in any form of anything that puts down any human child of God. I've never seen a rainbow. We talked about rainbow coalitions years ago, but we had never seen it. And we're actually seeing it. And the protesters reflect that. And the fact that they are all colors, all stripes and types of God's rainbow people is a sign of remarkable hope. That is, at least in this American context, somebody in this country rising up and saying, we can be better than this. We can be better than this. And here's one way we can do that. And that is a sign of hope. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina right now. And I saw James Franklin's around here somewhere. I thought I saw him. Oh, there he is. Oh, there you are. We got North. Oh, some Tar Heels in the neighborhood. But I'm here now. Oh, Lord, hear more. And I can tell you, y'all don't know it, but NASCAR there is the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But NASCAR is the fourth member of that. In the South, NASCAR is it. And NASCAR has been, and when I was Bishop of North Carolina, we had to schedule confirmation visits around Charlotte at particular times of the year because of the NASCAR schedule. We actually had to, because you couldn't get in or you couldn't get out of Charlotte if you went in at a race at the wrong time. And there are other parts of the diocese down Route 1, the same thing was true. But NASCAR was also the embodiment and the bastion of the Old South, not the New South, but the Old South. And for NASCAR to say no more Confederate, no more battle flags. For NASCAR, for those, I almost cried when I saw Bubba Williams, but not him, when I saw all of those racers and that NASCAR community come out to support not just him, but what he represented. That's hope. I've never seen that before, and I never dreamed it before. And yet, in city after city, whether it was George Floyd, whether it's in Minneapolis, Atlanta, or we could call the roll, there's police violence, not by all cops, not by all, but there's something in the water. There's something in the culture. This has been with us since I was a teenager. This exact same problem hasn't gone away. But this is the same nation that elected Barack Obama and killed George Floyd. This could be a cause of despair or a call to engage, to march with the marchers, both literally and in other ways, to say the way we are is not good enough. We can be better than this. But I'm aware that we do so for a very different reason. We do so because we follow Jesus of Nazareth. And he taught us another way of living. That his way of love is the reason we stand for justice. His way of love is the reason we believe nobody should be put down by anybody. His way of love is the reason we want America to truly be America, with liberty and justice for all. His way of love is the reason we will never settle for a world that is less than God's dream for all of God's children. But that's hard to remember in the midst of the fray. Dr. King many years ago knew that, following in the footsteps of the Mahatma. For those who were involved in many of his struggles, were given a little rule of life, a little guide, set of principles by which to live. Dr. King composed one of those little rules, a set of principles for folk who were involved in early in the Montgomery bus boycott in 55 and 56, but more fully developed in the Birmingham struggle in 1963. And here were the principles. And this is why we walk, why we work, why we do what we do. He said, remember, the nonviolent movement seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. Remember to always walk and talk in the manner of love, because the Bible says God is love. Pray daily that you might be used by God, that all men and women might be free. Sacrifice personal wishes that all might truly be free. Observe with friends and foes alike the ordinary rules of courtesy. Perform regular services for others in the world. Refrain from violence of fist, tongue, or heart. Strive always to be in good spiritual and bodily health. But the first principle was this, and I quote, as you prepare to march, meditate on the life and teachings of Jesus. And then march, then speak, then act. As you prepare to act in the world, however you do it, however you are called to do it, begin by meditating on the life and teachings of Jesus.
Thank you, Presiding Bishop, for being with us as a member of the organizing team. It was such a joy to have you. My question is this. Bishop Jennifer Baskerville Burroughs in Indianapolis recently spoke and wrote quite insightfully, "When I go to the webpage of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream, it is clear that they are about selling ice cream and dismantling white supremacy. I want our church to be that clear." So my question to you, Presiding Bishop, is can the Episcopal Church website be that clear? And how can we be clear in our own context?
You know, I think the answer is yes. I mean, first, but it's going to take institutional communal discipline to do that. Notice the simplicity of Ben and Jerry's. Notice how simple it is. It isn't a paragraph mission statement. And it's also consistent with actually what they do for the most part. I mean, they sell ice cream, and they have advocated or supported causes that help to eradicate or work against white supremacy and other things. I mean, so their message is consistent, but it's simple, it's clear. I think the church, the Episcopal Church, I can't talk about anybody else. I think we must become clear that we follow Jesus of Nazareth and we seek to make a better world following his way of love. Just that simple, just that clear. When we are that clear, I've been trying, it's going to take some more. It's going to take some work. But when we are that clear, then we know Jesus is the ice cream. And part of the work that we do involves the eradication of white supremacy or any kind of supremacy of anybody over anybody else. But we do it following Jesus to make this a better world that looks like God's dream and not our nightmare. When we are clear that that is what our baptism calls us to, that is who we are. That's one of the reasons I was talking about Jesus movement for years, been running around talking about that, because that was a way of refocusing us from being whatever it is we thought we were to being who I believe our baptism, Jesus in our baptism, has called us to be. And I think the more we are clear about that, and I think it's happening, I think it's happening of necessity. Things don't change overnight. But something happened when the president went to St. John's Church in Lafayette Square. And all I know is Episcopalians got some emotion. I ain't seen that much emotion out of Episcopalians. I've been an Episcopalian 67 years, my whole life. I've never seen, I mean, for the most part, Episcopalians said, wait a minute, that's not the religion, that's not what we're about. There was, now everybody, believe me, I've got the emails from those who disagree. but for the most part, the average Episcopalian around this country said, wait a minute, we've heard a different gospel. And it is not about putting down anybody. And it is not about dominance. It is not about narrow-mindedness. It is not anti-scientific. It's about a way of love that's a way of life. Now they haven't settled, but that reaction tells me we're getting close to the wisdom that Ben and Jerry's have stumbled into, but we've got to keep going back at it. I said to a couple of bishops, I said, look, don't get on TV and don't go on the show and not talk about Jesus and his way of love. Because they know what I'm going to talk about when they put me on TV. And that's what they're going to get, because we've got to hammer that home, because we represent in our best a countercultural version of what it means to be Christian in a culture where Christianity has actually been hijacked by things that don't even remotely look like Jesus of Nazareth. And so we've got to stay on our message. This is what we're about. This is who we are. We are a Jesus movement, and we're bound and determined to work with anybody who wants to help this world look something like God's dream. Thank you. Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you.
I want to follow that up. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
American Christianity and white supremacy have quite a history and a relationship to untangle. And so how important do you think dismantling white supremacy is to the future of Christianity in America?
You know, it's going to be critical. I hadn't thought, no one's ever asked me that question before. It's critical because, unfortunately, Christianity has been entangled with white supremacy. I mean, it actually has been. I mean, from the justification of the forced removal and genocide of the indigenous peoples of the land, to the enslavement of Africans, to the suppression of women. I mean, you go through the litany. Christianity was the philosophical or theological justification for a lot of that stuff. And so dismantling white supremacy means dethroning the idols of a false Christianity and a false Christian narrative that has dominated much of what we used to call America a Christian nation. It's not that, it never was that. But that was an idol, and that idol of Christian nationalism. And I would say this if I lived in any country, any form of Christian nationalism is an idol, and it is not about the religion of Jesus. Religion of Jesus is in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5, I keep telling Episcopalians, if I don't do anything else, I'm going to get y'all to know one part of scripture, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. You do that one, we'll be good enough. You know, I'll settle for Matthew 25 even if I have to, but something, you know, but there is no way in the world any kind of Christian nationalism or any kind of supremacy, white supremacy or any supremacy of anybody over, only God is supreme. The rest of us are equal. And that's, so I do think dethroning white supremacy is going to dethrone much of what has purported to be Christianity or the Christian religion. And that, I think, will eventually free us to actually be the people following the way of Jesus. It will save the soul of Christianity. To be very honest, I don't think just the soul of America is at stake right now. I think the very soul of Christianity, and maybe of religion, but I can't speak too confidently of other religion, but the soul of Christianity, which has been entangled with white supremacy and the subjugation of a whole bunch of folk, may actually save the soul of Christianity itself. It's hard to, we've not been able to even talk about white supremacy. I think, you know, it's going to be interesting to see. It's too early to assess what's going on in our midst, but I think the brutality of the death of George Floyd, you know what, this Thanksgiving, thank God for that 17-year-old girl who took out her cell phone and filmed that. Because I think for the first time since Emmett Till was killed, was lynched, and completely disfigured, what was it, 1950, 51? And they were going to close the coffin. And his mama said, no, let the world see what was done to my boy. And that was as epical a change as Rosa Parks refusing to move on the bus. 1963 in Birmingham, when Walter Cronkite in CBS News showed German Shepherd police dogs attacking peaceful protesters, many of whom were teenagers. America said, wait a minute, we don't want to be like that. And I think the murder of George Floyd that everyone saw caused such a revulsion that it, as Gandhi said, it pricked the conscience of those who had one and touched hearts. and has cracked open something that has not been cracked open before. What it opened up and revealed was the fruit of white supremacy. It had been there all along, but we actually saw it and saw the power of that supremacy to actually take life and kill. And so now a national conversation is possible. Maybe a nation will get saved, and maybe a religion will get saved too. Maybe a world. Thank you, Beth. Oh, there. Oh, thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is, or the question I have, what would you say to those who feel that their words, prayers, and actions aren't making a difference right now? How can we as campus chaplains, as ESC program directors, as ministers, help to instill hope and support people's empowerment, especially people who have been marginalized as a result of racism?
Yeah. You really are in a strategic position. Part of the wisdom of King in that the little rule of life that he did, part of the wisdom before you march, meditate on the life and teachings of Jesus, was that I suspect, and he never really wrote about this, why he did this. He never actually, we don't have any of these, I'm not aware of anything on what his thinking was. But part of the wisdom of that was the realization is, I don't innately and automatically have the capacity to run this long distance race, which is often countercultural and counterintuitive and counter to what some of my baser instincts would be, which is to say, I don't automatically love people who are not loving toward me. I mean, that is not my default response. I mean, I could be alone in that, but that's not my default response. I don't think it's anybody's. So to ask folk to live a countercultural life, counterintuitive, counter to what their almost default position would be for the most part, is going to require not just willpower on their part, but it's going to require some additional power beyond their will. It's like that old Broadway thing, your arms are too short to box with God. You got to get God in with, and part of what ministers with communities of young adults, campus ministers and chaplains and other, part of what you can do is to help communities of people begin to organize their lives around spiritual practices that can actually feed them when they don't have the strength to go on their own. Because the work of a better world, the work of love and the work of justice is a long distance run. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And progress is slow. Moments when we realize it look like they're fast, but they've had years of gestation and people of hard work, people slugging through the mud. And then there's a moment when there's a breakthrough, and then you slug through the mud for years. There were marches on Washington for years before 1963 and Dr. King and the folk. They were marching on, my granddaddy was marching on Washington with the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. That was going on back in the 30s and the 40s. But it didn't click. But it kept marching until in 63, something did click. That's the nature of progress. It's several steps forward and you get knocked back. Several steps and you get knocked back. That is just the way it is. I don't know. You got to ask God, why is it that way? I don't know. But if you read the stories in the Bible, the stories of the Exodus, I mean, Moses, it took forever. All those stories about the plagues and all that stuff, that is, I want to say, the nonviolent liberation struggle, although that one got a little bit violent. But for the most part, it is part of the struggle of freedom. Freedom is not given. It is wrung after struggle and work, and it's hard, and there are going to be setbacks. And none of us none of us have the power to keep going. There are times when you just can't do it anymore. And that's why I believe we just need to be in partnership with each other, but we need to be in partnership with the living God, because my arms are too short. And part of your calling is to help young folk find those living springs that can feed us for the long haul. Yeah, don't shy away. Well, you don't. I know you don't. I mean, I know what some of y'all do. But to help folk find that living water in practices of community that actually do that. You know, it's. I mean, I've never preached on this, but you know, with Jesus on Good Friday, all that stuff with Jesus on the cross, and you know, 7 last words and all that. A lot of that stuff is psalms or excerpts from various psalms, and you know. You wonder, for Jesus on the cross, as consciousness is slipping, if in fact he reaches back in his mind and in his heart to stuff he learned long before. I remember reading one scholar who said Psalm 22 that begins, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? That was a psalm that a Jewish mother taught her child when he was a little child. That on the cross, is it possible Jesus reached back to the spiritual well that his mama taught him to get him through that? That's what you give to young people. That's what you have the capacity to give to young people. Because this is a long, like the Bible says, the race is not to the swift, but to those that persevere. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Bishop. Brad, I'm going to call on you next.
As you probably know very well, our college campus, on college campuses and in our communities, our ministries and congregations are many times the only places where those of the LGBTQIA community are welcomed and accepted and included. And yet not all of our communities know how to do this well. And I was wondering if you had ideas of what might be the best ways to make sure that LGBTQIA young adults feel welcome in our student groups and in our churches.
Oh, in both the student groups and in the churches. Let me ask you a question. What are some of the ways that you all do that now? What are some of the ways intentionally to make space and room? What are some of the ways that you do that?
Anybody can pipe in and answer his question. What are the ways that we welcome LGBTQIA folks into our midst now?
I suppose if you have a rainbow flag, that might be a signal, and it might help. I mean, sometimes words can say it, but sometimes a symbol says a whole lot. I mean, just having that at the door or visible. But are there some other ways that you intentionally can make communities, whether they're campus communities or churches, not just welcoming, but actually places where?
One way I do it, I'm at Rutgers, and we work closely with the LGBTQ Center and community on campus. So to make sure that they know who we are, and I pair with them, took their training, because they offer safe zone training, things like that, and to just publicize on campus who we are. And it's not just, we actually have a poster in our church, in our building, that says, go worship where you are celebrated, not just tolerated. And that's what I want them to hear. It's not just I heard one other pastor, not Episcopalian, I won't say what denomination, say, we welcome all sinners, as if that was somehow, and I don't want to just be welcoming. I want to be on the front lines of saying, you are loved and you are valued and you are celebrated here.
You know, I don't, you know, that's pretty powerful in itself, because now I'm speaking from the perspective of being in the South, but I don't think we're unusual. But let me just stay in the South for a moment. A welcoming, an affirming and welcoming Christian church is a countercultural reality where we are. And my experience of our campus ministries when I was bishop here was that they were intrinsically countercultural and had to be explicit. Like you were just saying, was it Scott? We're just saying explicit. We are a community where all are really welcome, and we really mean that, because that's what Jesus is about. Or some, I don't know how you, but some way that you say it so not, excuse my expression, not usual Episcopalian nuance and subtlety. Explicit, clear. And because that's not the normal message LGBTQI folk are used to hearing from Christian folk. Fortunately, some do grow up hearing that, but that's not the norm. It's just not.
So you know, one of the things that's been really helpful at Yale has been partnering with the Queer Christian Association. We have so many really evangelical, large evangelical groups that kind of disguise their antipathy toward LGBTQ plus folk, and they don't really discover it until they get in. Yeah. So what we did was partner with this Queer Christian group and had them interview every Christian church on campus and demand or ask for a clear statement on their relationship with LGBTQ plus folk. And they actually got people to write it up, and they are organizing it to publish those statements now in the Yale Daily News, so that everyone who looks up any Christian church can see where they actually stand, or if they refuse to take a stand on that question. And it's eliminating a lot of the hurt that happens in the first and second years of college, where people will enthusiastically join a Christian organization only to find a year later that they're not qualified for an officer status there because they're gay.
Because they're gay.
And it's just been awful for so many people. So, and of course, in partnering with them, suddenly the Episcopal Church becomes on campus, you know, known as fully affirming, fully welcoming, you know, and so forth. So those partnerships, those public partnerships, I think are really vital.
That is great. Yeah. And being present, you know, and I think, again, I'm not on a campus. I mean, I'm way out of my league, but I know that presence means a lot. I mean, half of ministry, well, I don't know who said it, but anyway, I know that sometimes just showing up and for a chaplain, campus minister, somebody to show up where gay folk are and be present and supportive in some way. I mean, even if it's not, I mean beyond church, where stuff is going on, whether it's a lecture or I don't know, that kind of stuff actually does communicate. Because there are networks. I mean, people do talk. Human beings do talk. And there are folk looking for a loving, liberating, life-giving relationship with God. I mean, heck, that's what we all want. I mean, you know, and to realize that there actually is a church, or there are churches where that can be true for us all for real. One, it's an enormous gift, but sometimes it's, you know, earlier this week, it was in one of the readings, I don't remember when it was, earlier this week, about there's nothing hidden that will not be, where Jesus said there's nothing hidden that will not be revealed. This is something we need to reveal. Not for our sake, but for the sake of others who are actually looking and searching. Be as explicit as you can be, and then make that community work to be build a community. I mean, some of the hard work is continually creating a community where that really is true. I mean, that takes ongoing work. You represent hope for so many people, some of whom may never darken your door. You really do. We went, this is 10 years ago, maybe. I was still Bishop of North Carolina when the state legislature, this was the time when a number of states were trying to change the constitutions to define marriage as only between a man and a woman. And so that was going on in North Carolina. And there was this whole campaign called Amendment 1. And anyway, there was a group that was opposing Amendment 1, and they got these T-shirts and that said, vote against Amendment 1. It was kind of an underground campaign of young people. And it really was huge in the state, but it was underground. And so some of the clergy asked me if I would get my picture taken and be one of the people in the pictures. You know, and I said, oh, okay. But I remember kind of thinking, is the Bishop of North Carolina supposed to be in a T-shirt? I mean, is that, you know, I had to admit, I went through all the institutional stuff in my head, but just said, no, doggone it, let's just do it. So we went down in Durham, went down to the place where this was all being organized, and there were like 200 or 300 people in this place. It was incredible. It was a bar, I mean, a big tavern, an old brewery, and there were 200 or 300 people in there on a Sunday afternoon. Went in the place, I found out the place was owned by an Episcopalian, and I said, were you in church this morning? He said, no. I said, well, I expect to see you in church next Sunday. But I'm very glad you're doing this in the afternoon. But anyway, we went in, and when we went in, there were a couple of clergy, and we were in college. The place fell absolutely silent. Absolutely silent. And at first, I didn't get it until people started thanking us for showing up. And afterward, when we took the pictures and did, you know, all the stuff that was part of the campaign, there was a barbecue truck out front, and we went out to get some barbecue, and there was a person in front of us who said, their barbecue's on me. And I said, no, you don't have to do that. And he said, no, you all showed up. He said, we don't have Christians showing up to support us. And the fact that you showed up, I'm buying you some barbecue. And that was one of those moments when I realized we have been hurting people in the name of Jesus. And that's blasphemy. That's wrong. That's wrong. And sometimes we just got to show up. Thank you.
Presiding Bishop, thank you. I want to say a deep, a heartfelt thank you for making time for us today, for not worrying about us possibly stumping you with some of our questions, and for just being here and really speaking to the things that are on our hearts, that are on our minds, the things that we as young adult and campus ministers are dealing with and grappling with. So thank you for that. And if y'all want to do a clap, or I don't know how we do this, right?
How you do?
Yeah, I don't know how you and yeah.
But Shannon, thank you. And thank you all. Thank you for what you do. It really does matter. You know, the world doesn't have to be the way it often is. It can change, but it doesn't happen easily. And you can help some young adults figure out how they can be part of that change by following Jesus and living in his spirit. And, you know, that's a gift beyond measure. So thank you.
Amen.